June 12, 1962. Dawn breaks over San Francisco Bay. Guard walks into cell block B for morning count. Checks the first cell. Guy's still sleeping. Second cell, third. Fourth cell, wait. Something's wrong with this one. The head on the pillow looks off. He gets closer, pokes it. It's fake. Soap, toilet paper, human hair. Real human hair. 3 cells, 3 fake heads, 3 empty beds. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers are gone, vanished from the most secure prison in America, and they're still missing. Welcome to Sleepy Holidays. I'm about to tell you one of history's most incredible escape stories. Get comfortable, dim those lights, and let this story carry you away. If you're new here, hit subscribe for more deep historical mysteries. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love connecting with fellow insomniacs and history lovers around the world. Tonight we're going back to 1962, to a rock in San Francisco Bay, to 3 men who did the impossible, the rock in the bay. Picture America in 1962. JFK's in the White House, barely surviving the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cold War's freezing over, civil rights movements heating up, and in the middle of all this tension sits this fortress on an island, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, 1¼ miles off the San Francisco coast. They call it the Rock for good reason. Solid stone, surrounded by water so cold it'll kill you in minutes. Currents so strong they'll drag you out to sea before you can scream for help. The prison opened in 1934 with one mission: house the worst of the worst. The guys other prisons couldn't handle. Al Capone spent 4.5 years here. Machine Gun Kelly, Robert Stroud, the Birdman. 336 cells, each one 7 by 9 feet. Concrete walls 3 feet thick. Steel bars that took a year to cut through with the best tools. Every window had bulletproof glass. Guard towers watched every angle. They weren't just keeping criminals in, they were keeping hope out. The warden loved to brag. Escape-proof, he'd say. Absolutely impossible. Look around you. Water, water everywhere. Freezing water. Shark-infested water. Though that part was mostly myth. The real killers were the currents. Riptides that could suck a grown man under in seconds. Even if you made it past the guards, past the walls, past the razor wire, the bay would finish you. That was the theory anyway. 29 men had tried to escape before 1962. All failed. 14 caught, 5 shot dead, 10 presumed drowned. But here's what nobody counted on. Sometimes the system gets exactly the wrong guys. Guys who see impossible as just another word for challenging. December 1961, a transport bus pulls up to Alcatraz. Off steps Frank Morris, bank robber, escape artist, and according to his IQ tests, genius-level intelligence, 133 IQ. That puts him in the top 2% of the population, and he'd already escaped from prisons in Louisiana and Georgia. Third time's supposed to be the charm, right? Morris wasn't alone. Already waiting in cell block B were John and Clarence Anglin, brothers from Georgia, bank robbers who'd been caught trying to escape from another federal prison. These weren't desperate junkies or hothead killers. They were cold, calculating professionals. John Anglin had escaped from multiple prisons before Alcatraz. Clarence was just as slippery, and now all 3 were locked up together on a rock surrounded by killing water. The feds thought they'd finally contained their escape problem. Big mistake. See, most prisoners looked at Alcatraz and saw despair. These 3 looked at it and saw a puzzle. Morris got assigned to cell B138. The Anglin brothers were right nearby. They had access to the prison industries, the laundry, the barbershop, the kitchen, places where you could acquire things, tools, materials, information, and they had something more dangerous than any weapon: time. All the time in the world to plan, to observe, to think, to figure out what everyone said was impossible. Morris was methodical, spent his first week studying everything. Guard rotations, building blueprints he glimpsed during maintenance calls, the way sound travelled through the cell blocks, where the surveillance gaps were. The Anglin brothers were his perfect partners. They'd worked together their whole criminal careers, trusted each other completely, and they all shared the same burning need: freedom. Not just freedom from Alcatraz, freedom from a system that had labelled them irredeemable, that had written them off as lost causes. Now, you have to understand the stakes here. This wasn't just about three guys wanting out of prison. Alcatraz was the federal government's ultimate statement. We can hold anyone, anywhere, under any conditions. The whole American prison system's reputation rested on that rock. 29 men had tried to prove them wrong. 29 men had failed. If Morris and the Anglins succeeded, if they actually escaped from the escape-proof prison, it would shatter everything. The feds knew it. The warden knew it. Hell, even the other inmates knew it. Which made what happened next even more incredible. Because while the guards were watching for the usual escape attempts, the desperate runs for the fence, the hidden weapons, the riot plans, Morris and the Anglins were thinking bigger, way bigger. They were planning something so audacious, so technically complex, that even other criminals thought they were insane, something that would require months of preparation, absolute precision, and luck, lots of luck. But first, they needed to disappear, right inside their cells. The mood in cell block B was always tense. 300 men packed into tiny concrete boxes, the sound of steel doors slamming, keys rattling, guards shouting. But under that surface tension, something else was building. Morris and the Anglins were different from other inmates, quieter, more focused. Other prisoners started noticing. These three weren't just doing time, they were studying time, learning its rhythms, finding its weaknesses, and slowly, very slowly, they began to exploit those weaknesses. The rock was about to crack. Think about that for a second. The most secure prison in America, surrounded by freezing, turbulent water, guarded 24/7 by armed men who shot to kill, and three convicts thought they could beat all of that with their bare hands and whatever they could scrounge up. It sounds impossible, because it was impossible. Every expert said so. Every previous attempt proved it. But Frank Morris had an IQ of 133, and the Anglin brothers had something even more valuable. Absolutely nothing left to lose. What they were planning would take 10 months. 10 months of secret work right under the noses of federal guards. 10 months of solving problems that would challenge professional engineers. 10 months of knowing that one mistake, one moment of bad luck, meant solitary confinement or death. And at the end of those 10 months, they'd either pull off the most famous prison escape in American history, or they'd die trying. Either way, their names would be remembered forever. The only question was, as failures or legends, genius among thieves. December 1961. A prison boat cuts through the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay, carrying one more criminal to the rock. Frank Morris sits in shackles, staring at Alcatraz through a small porthole. The guards don't know it yet, but they've just delivered their worst nightmare. This isn't Morris's first rodeo with maximum security. Hell, it's not even his fifth. Louisiana State Penitentiary, Atlanta Federal, and 3 others, all left with Frank-sized holes in their security. The FBI file on Frank Morris reads like a masterclass in prison breaks. 13 previous escape attempts, some successful, some not. But here's what caught everyone's attention. Morris never used brute force, never hurt a guard, never caused a riot. He just disappeared. One morning, cell door locked, bars intact, Frank Morris gone. Prison officials would scratch their heads for weeks trying to figure out how he'd done it. The man had an IQ of 133. Einstein-level problem-solving skills applied to concrete and steel. Inside that brilliant mind, Morris saw patterns others missed. While inmates complained about prison food, he studied guard rotations. While others lifted weights in the yard, he memorized shift changes. He noticed which guards checked cells thoroughly, and which ones just glanced. He catalogued every sound, every routine, every weakness. Prison officials thought they were containing a criminal. What they'd actually done was give a genius unlimited time to study their security system, and Frank Morris was a very patient student. His first week on the rock, Morris kept to himself, watched, listened, then he noticed them, the Anglin brothers. John and Clarence, bank robbers from Georgia, who'd already tried escaping from Atlanta Federal together. They had something Morris recognized immediately, that restless energy, that constant scanning of exits and opportunities. During exercise time in the yard, their eyes weren't on the other inmates or the bay. They were studying the walls, the towers, the routines. These weren't typical convicts settling into prison life. The first conversation happened over chess in the recreation room. John Anglin made a move that surprised Morris. sacrificing his queen to set up a winning position 5 moves later. Morris smiled and nodded. This guy could think ahead. They started talking about everything except escape, childhood in Georgia, bank jobs gone wrong. But underneath every conversation was an unspoken question. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? By January 1962, they were spending most of their free time together. 3 minds starting to work as one. Life inside Alcatraz was designed to break you down. 5 by 9-foot cells, concrete walls 3 feet thick, steel bars an inch thick, your bed, a sink, a toilet, and barely enough room to pace 3 steps. The cells on B Block, where Morris and the Anglins lived, faced east, which meant they caught the morning sun but stayed freezing cold the rest of the day. Guards counted you 17 times a day. Lights out at 9:30 p.m. sharp. No talking after hours. Solitary confinement for any rule violation. But Morris noticed something the prison designers missed. The daily routine created predictable patterns of surveillance and neglect. Between 5:30 and 6 a.m., one guard handled the entire B Block. Too many cells for one person to watch carefully. Library time from 1 to 2 p.m. meant guards focused on the library, not empty cells. Work details pulled guards to the industry's building. And at night, just one guard walking the block every 30 minutes. Morris filed every detail away, building a mental map of opportunity. By February, Morris and the Anglins had developed a language of glances and gestures. A scratch of the nose meant guard coming. A tap on the table meant meet in the yard later. They never spoke directly about escape, but they were already working together, sharing information, testing each other's observations. Clarence noticed the ventilation grates in their cells had never been properly secured after installation. John discovered the utility corridor that ran behind all the cells on their block. Morris connected the dots. The breakthrough came during a routine cell inspection in March. Morris watched the guard tap his nightstick against the concrete around his ventilation grate. The sound was different than it should be. Not solid concrete, something softer underneath. That night, lying in his bunk, Morris ran his fingers along the edges of his vent. The concrete was old, crumbling slightly. He could feel tiny pieces flaking away under pressure. For the first time since arriving at Alcatraz, Frank Morris smiled. He'd found their way out. But knowing about the weak concrete was just the beginning. The ventilation shaft behind his cell was only 8 inches by 14 inches, way too small for a grown man. They'd need to widen it significantly without anyone noticing. They'd need tools that didn't exist in prison. They'd need a way to hide their work for months while guards walked past their cells. They'd need to solve a dozen engineering problems with no resources. Most inmates would have given up right there. Morris and the Anglins started getting excited. April 1962. 3 brilliant criminals sitting in the prison yard, not talking about escape, but talking about everything else while thinking about escape. Morris had started sketching mechanical drawings during art therapy. Nobody questioned an inmate trying to stay occupied. The Anglins paid closer attention to work details, noting which tools went missing and which guards were sloppy about inventory. They weren't planning yet, not really, but they were gathering intelligence, building the foundation for something that had never been done before. The genius wasn't in having one brilliant idea, it was in solving 100 smaller problems that nobody else even saw. How do you widen concrete without making noise? How do you hide construction debris? How do you work at night without light? How do you make sure the guard's routine inspection doesn't reveal your progress? Morris approached each challenge like a puzzle. The Anglins brought street smarts and practical skills. Together they started seeing solutions where others only saw impossible obstacles. By May, they weren't 3 separate inmates anymore. They were a team. Morris, the mastermind with the engineering brain. John Anglin, steady hands and patience for detailed work. Clarence, the lookout with perfect timing and an ear for approaching footsteps. They'd found their rhythm, their trust, and something else. They'd found Alan West, another inmate whose cell had the same weak concrete around the ventilation grate. 4 men now, 4 minds working on the problem that had stumped 29 previous escape attempts. Late May 1962, Morris lying in his cell after lights out, running through calculations in his head. Concrete thickness, tool requirements, timeline, guard rotations, all the variables clicking into place like a combination lock opening. For the first time, the plan wasn't just wishful thinking. It was real. detailed, possible. Tomorrow he'd start acquiring their first tool. In 6 weeks they'd begin the most audacious prison break in American history. 3 men about to prove that Alcatraz wasn't inescapable after all. Tools of trade and treachery. Picture this. You're locked inside the most secure prison in America. Concrete walls 3 feet thick, guards watching your every move, and you need tools, not just any tools, but precision instruments capable of chipping through reinforced concrete without making a sound. Frank Morris stares at the ventilation grate in his cell. 6 inches by 9 inches, way too small for a human body. But what if it wasn't? The question becomes, how do you widen concrete when you don't have tools? Here's the thing about maximum security. They don't just hand you a toolbox on arrival. Every piece of metal gets counted. Every sharp edge gets confiscated. Inmates get searched daily. Cells get tossed weekly. So when Morris and the Anglin brothers start planning their escape, they're working with basically nothing. No hammers, no chisels, no drills, just their hands and whatever they can scrounge up without raising suspicion, which means they need to get creative, really creative, the kind of creative that borders on genius. The mess hall becomes their shopping center. Sounds crazy, right? But think about it. Hundreds of inmates eating with metal spoons 3 times a day. Guards can't count every piece of cutlery perfectly. One spoon goes missing here, another there. Within weeks they've got a collection. Not fancy spoons. These are thick, durable, institutional grade. Strong enough to scrape concrete if you're patient. And patience? These guys have nothing but time. The question is whether they have enough time before someone notices what they're up to. Every night after lights out, the scraping begins. Morris lies on his bunk, reaching up to the ventilation grate above his head. The spoon handle fits perfectly between the metal slats. He presses the bowl against the concrete rim and starts working. Scrape, 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 scrape. The sound is almost inaudible, like fingernails on fabric. But in the dead silence of Alcatraz after midnight, every noise carries. One guard walking by at the wrong moment. Game over. Solitary confinement. Maybe worse. But the concrete is giving way. Tiny flakes at first. The spoons aren't enough. They need something with real power behind it. That's when Morris spots the vacuum cleaner in the corridor during work detail. Industrial strength, built for heavy use. More importantly, it's got a motor inside. A motor that spins fast. The next day during maintenance duty, Morris volunteers to help fix broken equipment. 20 minutes later, the vacuum motor mysteriously disappears. The guards write it off as typical prison inefficiency. Missing parts, sloppy record keeping. They have no idea they just handed over the key component for a homemade drill. Building a drill from a vacuum motor isn't exactly simple. You need housing. You need a bit. You need power. Morris cannibalizes parts from wherever he can find them. A metal rod from a broken broom handle, wire from the electrical shop, screws from loose fixtures around the prison. Each piece gets smuggled back to his cell over weeks, hidden inside his clothes, taped under his bunk. The whole operation is like assembling a jigsaw puzzle, where getting caught with any piece means 20 years in the hole. The first test of the homemade drill happens on a Tuesday night. Morris plugs it into his cell's electrical outlet. Jury-rigged wiring. Probably a fire hazard. Definitely against every prison regulation. The motor whirs to life. Louder than expected. Way louder. He kills the power immediately. Heart hammering. Did anyone hear that? Footsteps in the corridor. He lies perfectly still for 10 minutes. Nothing. But he knows they need to muffle the sound somehow. Cotton from their mattresses. Towels from the laundry. Anything to absorb the noise and keep their secret safe. Progress comes in millimeters. Each night they manage to widen the concrete opening just a tiny bit more. The drill works, but it's slow going. Hit the concrete too hard and chunks break off. Evidence that someone's been tampering. Too soft and nothing happens. They develop a rhythm. Short bursts with the drill. Scraping with spoons to clear debris. Checking constantly for guards. By morning they sweep every speck of concrete dust out of sight. Replace the grate. Make the bed. Act normal, as if they spent the night sleeping instead of tunneling. The Anglin brothers are working their own vents. Same tools, same technique, same risk. But John's vent is giving him trouble. The concrete around his grate is harder somehow, different mix, maybe older. His spoon keeps bending. His section of the homemade drill bit dulls faster. Some nights he makes zero progress. Just lies there, scraping the same spot over and over, fighting the urge to hit it harder, make more noise, risk everything for an extra millimeter. Patience becomes a form of torture when freedom feels so close yet so far away. Sound discipline becomes everything. They learn to time their drilling with the foghorns from San Francisco Bay, cover the motor noise with natural sounds. When ships pass by, engines rumbling, that's when they work fastest. Dead calm nights, just spoons and patience. They memorize the guard rotation schedules, which officers walk heavy, which ones tiptoe. Guard Wilson always stops at cell 43 to check his watch. Guard Martinez never looks up. Tiny details that mean the difference between escape and disaster. Every night is a gamble with 20-year stakes. The physical toll starts showing. Hours of reaching overhead, arms cramped in impossible positions, fingers raw from gripping makeshift tools, concrete dust in their lungs. Despite the towel masks, Morris develops a persistent cough that worries him, too obvious, too suspicious. The Anglin brothers' hands are cut up from sharp metal edges on their improvised equipment, but they can't stop, won't stop. Each night brings them closer to that moment when the opening will be wide enough, when a human body can squeeze through, when the impossible becomes possible. 3 months in, Clarence makes the breakthrough. His grate pops loose completely, not just wide enough, but actually removable. He can lift it out, set it aside, and look up into darkness. The space behind the wall is bigger than expected, a utility corridor running between the cell blocks, unguarded, unmonitored, a hidden highway through the supposedly impenetrable fortress of Alcatraz. When he whispers the news to his brother John, the words taste like freedom, but they're not done yet. Morris and John still need to finish their openings, and then the real work begins. The final push takes 2 more weeks. Morris and John working with desperate urgency now that they know success is possible. Their spoons are worn down to nubs. The makeshift drill is falling apart from overuse, but the concrete keeps giving way, chip by chip, scrape by scrape, until finally one night in late May 1962, all 3 vents are ready, wide enough for a man to squeeze through. The grates lift out cleanly. The secret corridor beckons. 4 months of patient, dangerous work, and they've just opened a door in the most secure prison in America. They've done it. Created something that shouldn't exist. A secret passage through Alcatraz. The utility corridor stretches in both directions, filled with pipes and electrical conduits. No guards patrol here. No cameras watch. It's a blind spot in the prison's supposedly perfect security. Standing in that hidden space for the first time, Morris and the Anglin brothers realize they've crossed a line. They're no longer just inmates dreaming of escape. They're fugitives in waiting. The hardest part, the patient, dangerous work of making tools and widening concrete, that's behind them now. Masters of disguise. Here's where Morris and the Anglins became artists. Not painters or sculptors, but creators of the most crucial illusion of their lives. Because every night, when guards made their rounds, they needed to see 3 sleeping prisoners. But those prisoners, they'd be gone, working in the corridors, widening vents, building their raft, so they had to leave something behind, something that would fool a flashlight beam at midnight, something that looked exactly like a human head on a pillow. The materials were right there in the prison. Soap from the commissary, toilet paper from their cells, paint they'd been secretly collecting for weeks. But here's the genius part. They needed hair, real human hair. And where do you get that in prison? The barbershop. Morris started volunteering to sweep up after haircuts, collecting clippings in his pockets. Brown hair, black hair, grey streaks, different textures, because these dummies had to look like them, specifically them. Picture Morris in his cell after lights out, carving soap with a stolen spoon, shaping cheekbones, working by feel in the darkness. One wrong move and the soap crumbles. Start over. He's making a sculpture of his own face from memory. Think about that. You try carving your own head in complete darkness, getting the jaw right, the nose, the forehead, hour after hour of delicate work. And this isn't art class. This is life or death. Toilet paper became skin. layer after layer carefully applied with paste they made from bread and water, building up texture, smoothing rough edges, creating that soft human look that soap alone couldn't give them. The Anglin brothers were doing the same thing 3 cells away, each man crafting his own double, his own ghost to leave behind, and they had no idea if any of this would actually work. They were inventing movie magic with prison supplies. The paint job had to be perfect. Flesh tone mixed from stolen art supplies and whatever they could find. Too pink, and it looks like a doll. Too pale, and it looks like a corpse. They needed that exact shade of sleeping human. Morris tested colours on scraps of paper first, adjusting, mixing, getting it right. Because guards had been looking at their faces for months, they knew what Morris looked like, what the Anglins looked like. One off shade and the whole plan dies. Then came the hair transplant. Strand by strand, they pressed real human hair into the painted heads, following their own hairlines, their cowlicks, the way John Anglin's hair stuck up in back, the way Morris's hair lay flat against his forehead. They were creating forensic-level replicas of themselves. And remember, they're doing this at night, in near darkness, with guards walking past every few hours. One sound, one glimpse of what they're actually doing. Game over. The first test was terrifying. Morris placed his dummy on the pillow, pulled the blanket up to its chin, stepped back and looked. In the dim light, it actually looked human, peaceful, asleep. He could barely believe it. But would it fool a guard with a flashlight? Would it pass that crucial moment when the beam hits the pillow and the guard decides whether or not to keep walking? Everything depended on that split-second judgment call. The first real night they used the dummies was April 1962, 2 months before the escape. Morris lay his head on the pillow, then quickly swapped it for the fake, slipped through his widened vent into the corridor behind the cells, heart pounding, waiting for shouts, alarms, nothing. The guard's footsteps echoed past his cell. Flashlight beams swept across the dummy's face, kept walking. Holy hell! It worked. The illusion was perfect. They had their key to freedom. But success brought new problems. The dummies were fragile. Soap could crack. Hair could fall out. Paint could fade under repeated flashlight exposure. They started making improvements, reinforcing weak spots, touching up the paint job, adding more realistic details. Clarence Anglin even gave his dummy a subtle 5 o'clock shadow using charcoal dust. These weren't just decoys anymore. They were masterpieces of criminal craftsmanship, art born from desperation. The anxiety was constant now. Every night they used the dummies was another roll of the dice. What if a guard got suspicious? What if he came closer, shined the light longer, touched the head to wake up a prisoner? The whole escape plan balanced on this one fragile illusion, and they were using it every single night, working in the corridors, building their raft, living double lives, existing as both prisoner and ghost. They perfected the positioning. The dummy had to be placed just right, too high on the pillow, and it looked unnatural, too low and the proportions were wrong. The blanket couldn't be too tight or too loose. The angle of the head mattered. Even the way the fake hair fell on the pillow had to look natural, like someone who'd been sleeping for hours. They studied their own sleeping positions, memorized how they looked unconscious, then recreated it perfectly with soap and toilet paper. Guard routines became their obsession. Officer Peterson always walked fast on his midnight round, barely glanced in cells. Officer Williams took his time, let his flashlight linger. Thompson was unpredictable, sometimes quick, sometimes thorough. They mapped every guard's habits, timed their routes, learned their personalities, because the dummies had to fool all of them. Different eyes, different expectations, different levels of suspicion. One careful guard could end everything. Then came the perfect night. May 28th, 1962, all 3 dummies in place. Morris and the Anglins working frantically in the corridors, making final preparations for the escape just 2 weeks away. Guard Williams made his rounds at 11:47 p.m. Flashlights swept across all 3 cells, lingered on John Anglin's dummy for what felt like forever. The fake hair caught the light just right, looked perfectly natural. Williams kept walking, not a hint of suspicion. The illusion was flawless. That night proved it. They had mastered the art of deception. 3 soapheads were buying them hours of freedom every single evening, but success made them bold. Maybe too bold. They were taking bigger risks, working later, staying in the corridors longer, because the dummies worked so well, they forgot how dangerous this game really was. Every night was Russian roulette, and they were about to bet everything on one final, impossible performance: the Great Balloon Heist. By spring of 1962, Morris and the Anglin brothers had carved their way into Alcatraz's hidden arteries. But escaping the building? That was just step one. The real challenge lay 50 feet below, in the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay. Waters that had claimed every other escape attempt. Waters that moved like liquid death around this rock. They needed something no prisoner had ever managed to build. Something that could actually float. And somehow, they were about to pull it off. It started with raincoats. Dozens of them. The prison issued these heavy rubber things to inmates working outside during storms. Morris watched the guards, counted the extras, noted which ones went missing and how long before anyone cared. See, here's what most people don't understand about prison. It's not just about breaking out, it's about becoming invisible first. And somehow these three men had mastered the art of being ghosts, while still breathing. They didn't just steal the coats randomly. Morris had a system. One coat here, another there. Always from different locations. Never enough to trigger an inventory. West would grab one from the laundry. John Anglin would sneak another from the work detail storage. Clarence would pocket one during rain duty. Over months they accumulated nearly 24 rubber raincoats. Guards walking right past them, completely unaware they were watching their escape raft get built, one piece at a time. But stealing the materials was nothing compared to what came next. They had to transform these coats into something that could actually save their lives. Working in that cramped utility corridor behind their cells, they began the painstaking process of cutting and reshaping. Morris had studied every maritime rescue manual in the prison library. He knew exactly what they needed. The question was whether they could actually build it without getting caught or killed. This is where their plan gets truly insane. They needed to seal the rubber pieces together, but regular glue wouldn't work in salt water. So Morris figured out how to vulcanize rubber using the prison's own steam heating system. They would carefully position pieces of rubber near the steam pipes that ran through the corridor. The intense heat would actually fuse the materials together at a molecular level. Basically, they turned Alcatraz into their own personal rubber factory. The process was incredibly dangerous. Too much heat and the rubber would melt into useless goo. Too little, and it wouldn't bond at all. Morris spent weeks perfecting the timing. Clarence would act as lookout while John held the pieces steady. They had maybe 10 minutes at a time before they risked getting caught. 10 minutes to create watertight seals that would either save their lives or send them straight to the bottom of San Francisco Bay. Night after night, they assembled their floating salvation. The main raft was roughly 6 feet by 14 feet, big enough for 3 grown men, small enough to fit through their planned exit route. They reinforced every seam twice, added extra air chambers, built in redundancy after redundancy, because they all knew the truth. This wasn't just about escaping prison. This was about surviving one of the most dangerous stretches of water on the entire planet, and they'd only get one chance. The life vests were even more complex. Each man needed individual flotation that wouldn't tear or deflate if the raft failed. Morris designed them with multiple air chambers and reinforced straps. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. They were using Alcatraz's own materials to build their freedom. Every stolen raincoat, every midnight work session, every carefully vulcanized seal was another middle finger to the system that claimed it could hold them forever. But they couldn't test any of it. Not really. One leak, one failed seal, one miscalculation, and they'd die in the bay before anyone even knew they were gone. So they relied on mathematics and hope. Morris calculated buoyancy ratios in his head. The Anglins checked and double-checked every connection. They were building their escape vessel based on theory and desperation. No do-overs, no second chances, just 3 men betting their lives on homemade engineering. The work was taking its toll. Months of late-night construction in cramped spaces, always listening for guards, always ready to hide everything at a moment's notice. Their fingers were raw from handling rough rubber. Their backs ached from hunching over their work. But they kept going, because the alternative was spending the rest of their lives in these cells. And for Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, that simply wasn't an option. They also needed paddles, wooden ones that could push them through the bay's vicious currents. So they stole pieces from the prison workshop, carefully shaped them during their assigned work hours, smuggled them back to their secret workspace one component at a time, even carved handles for better grip. These weren't desperate men throwing together random junk. These were engineers building precision equipment that had to work perfectly on the most important night of their lives. By May 1962, their floating arsenal was nearly complete. Raft, life vests, paddles, everything they needed to survive the bay. But as Morris ran his hands over their handiwork, he felt something he hadn't expected. Fear, not of drowning or getting caught. Fear that they'd actually done it, that after all these months of dreaming and planning and building, they were about to attempt something that 30 men before them had died trying. The final equipment check was scheduled for early June. Every seal tested, every strap examined, every paddle balanced for weight and grip. They stored everything in waterproof bundles, ready to be moved at a moment's notice. The dummy heads were finished, the escape route was memorized, the timing was perfected. All that remained was choosing the right night, the right tide, the right moment when the impossible might actually become possible. As spring turned to summer, something electric filled the air in that hidden corridor. 3 men looked at their makeshift marine gear and saw freedom. Months of stolen materials and midnight labor had produced something remarkable, something that just might work. They didn't speak about it directly, but they all felt it. The plan was ready. The equipment was ready. Soon, very soon, they would find out if they were ready, if they could actually escape the inescapable. Cycle of suspense. March 1962. The vent's wide enough now. Frank Morris slides his shoulders through, drops into the utility corridor behind the cells. Complete darkness, his heart hammering against his ribs. This isn't practice anymore. One wrong move, one sound, one guard doing an unexpected check. Game over. Death row, maybe. But he's committed now. They all are. Tonight marks the beginning of their actual escape attempts, testing the route they've mapped in their heads for months. Reality versus theory. And reality? Reality's about to get very, very complicated. Morris moves through the corridor like he's walking through a minefield. Every pipe, every junction, every turn memorized from stolen maintenance blueprints. John and Clarence Anglin are right behind him, breathing shallow, following his lead. They reach the first test, the vertical shaft leading up through the plumbing chase. Morris grips the pipes, starts climbing. The metal's ice cold, slippery with condensation. 30 feet up in total darkness. One slip means a fall that'll wake every guard in cell block B and probably kill you in the process. Halfway up the shaft, Morris freezes. Voices above, guards making rounds on the roof level. He signals the Anglins to stop climbing. They hang there in the darkness, muscles burning, listening to footsteps directly overhead. John Anglin's grip starting to slip. Clarence catching his brother's foot, steadying him. The voices fade. Morris counts to 60, then keeps climbing. This is why they needed months to plan this. Every variable, every risk, every possible disaster, and they're about to discover a few they hadn't thought of. Top of the shaft. Morris emerges into another maintenance area, wider space, but still pitch black. He can hear the Anglins climbing behind him, their breathing echoing off concrete walls. Now comes the tricky part, getting to the roof access without triggering any alarms. Morris feels along the walls, following their memorized map. There, the maintenance ladder leading up to the roof hatch. But when he tests the first rung, it's loose, rusted through. Their carefully planned route just hit its first major snag, Plan B. Morris signals the brothers to follow him deeper into the maintenance level. They've studied these blueprints for months. Know there's a second route to the roof. More dangerous, more exposed, but doable. They crawl through a ventilation duct barely wide enough for their shoulders. Clarence gets stuck halfway through. John and Morris have to pull him forward, his prison shirt tearing on the metal edges. They emerge near the prison's main electrical systems, humming transformers, high-voltage warning signs. One wrong move here kills you instantly. Morris finds the secondary roof access, a narrow maintenance shaft with a ladder that looks solid. He tests each rung carefully before putting his full weight on it. The Anglins follow, 20 feet up. They reach a locked hatch, but they've prepared for this. Morris pulls out a piece of metal they've sharpened into a makeshift pry bar, works the hatch open slowly, quietly. Fresh air hits their faces. San Francisco Bay wind. Freedom, but they're not free yet. Above them stretches the prison roof, and beyond that, a 50-foot drop to the shore. The roof of Alcatraz at night is a different world. Wind whipping off the bay, fog rolling in thick, visibility maybe 20 feet. Morris and the Anglins crawl across the tiles, staying low, avoiding the searchlight sweeps from the guard towers. They reach the northeast corner where they've planned their descent. 50 feet straight down to the rocky shore. Morris peers over the edge. The drop looks impossibly far in the darkness. This is where most escape attempts die. Not in the cells, not in the corridors. Right here. They've made rope from bed sheets twisted together, tested the knots 100 times in their cells. Morris ties it off to a ventilation pipe, tugs hard, holds his weight. John Anglin goes first, rappelling down the prison wall in complete darkness. Clarence follows. Morris watches them disappear into the fog below. His turn. He grips the makeshift rope, swings over the edge. The wind tries to slam him against the concrete wall, his hands burning from the rough fabric. Halfway down, he hears something that stops his heart cold. Guard voices from the roof above. Morris hangs motionless against the prison wall. The guards are checking something on the roof, their flashlight beams cutting through the fog above him. If they spot the rope, if they look over the edge, 3 escaped prisoners dangling like spiders on the side of America's most secure prison. He can hear the Anglins breathing below him, waiting. The guards move on. Morris continues his descent, his arms shaking with exhaustion. Finally, his feet hit solid rock. They're outside the prison, actually outside, for the first time in years. The shore of Alcatraz Island at 2 a.m. Morris, John, and Clarence Anglin stand on the rocky beach, looking out at San Francisco Bay. The water's black as oil, white caps breaking against the rocks, current running fast toward the Golden Gate. This is what kills most people who try to escape Alcatraz. Not the guards, not the walls, the bay itself. 58-degree water, currents that can drag you under in seconds, sharks, some say. But they've planned for this too. Their raft is hidden nearby, homemade, but carefully designed. Morris retrieves their life raft from its hiding spot behind the rocks, constructed from stolen raincoats, vulcanized with steam from the prison laundry pipes, wooden paddles carved from workshop scraps, life preservers made from the same raincoat material. It looks flimsy in the darkness, inadequate for the massive bay stretching out before them, but it's their ticket to freedom, or their coffin. John Anglin runs his hands over the seams, checking for leaks one final time. Everything depends on these next few hours. Everything they've worked for, planned for, dreamed of. They drag the raft to the water's edge. The bay is rougher than it looked from their cells, waves crashing against the rocks, spray hitting their faces. Morris steps into the water first. It's shockingly cold, even through his prison clothes. The current immediately tries to pull him sideways. This isn't like the gentle bay they see from the recreation yard. This is the real San Francisco Bay. Dangerous. Deadly. The Anglin brothers join him in the water, all 3 men fighting to keep the raft steady as they climb aboard. The moment they push off from Alcatraz Island, Morris knows they've crossed a line they can never uncross. The prison lights fade behind them as the current grabs their raft, pulling them toward the open bay. John Anglin starts paddling hard toward Angel Island, their planned first stop. Clarence bails water that's already seeping through the seams. Morris tries to navigate by the distant lights of San Francisco. The city looks impossibly far away, and the water's getting rougher. Much rougher than they expected. 3 hours later, soaked, exhausted, hypothermic, they're still alive, still together. The raft has held up better than expected, though they're taking on water faster now. Angel Island is somewhere in the darkness ahead, but the fog has rolled in thick. Morris can barely see John Anglin paddling beside him. They're committed now, no turning back, no prison cells to return to, just the endless black water of San Francisco Bay, and whatever waits on the other side, freedom or death. Tonight they'll find out which. A step too far. June 11th, 1962, 9:30 p.m. The lights go out across Alcatraz. In cells B138, B136, and B134, 3 men lie perfectly still, breathing shallow, hearts pounding. Frank Morris stares at the ceiling, running through every detail one last time. The Anglin brothers exchange a look through the darkness. Tonight's the night. No more planning, No more waiting, no more what-ifs. After 18 months of patient, methodical preparation, it's time to find out if their impossible plan actually works. They've been over this routine 1,000 times. Wait for the 10 p.m. count. Let the guards settle in. Give it another hour for the prison to fall into that deep, late-night quiet. Then move. Morris checks his watch in the dim light bleeding through the cell bars. 10:15. The guard's footsteps echo down the corridor, fading away. In the cell next door, he hears the softest scratch of concrete. John Anglin's already started working his vent loose. The final countdown has begun. But there's a problem. Down in cell B140, Alan West is struggling. His vent, it won't budge. All those months of careful grinding, widening the opening bit by bit. Something's gone wrong. The concrete around his vent has hardened differently. Or maybe the dampness has swelled the frame. Whatever it is, West can't get through. He's pushing, twisting, trying everything. The other three are ready to go. And West is stuck. The plan that required 4 men just became a plan for 3. Morris makes the call. They can't wait. Every minute increases the risk of discovery. In his cell, he slides the painted dummy head onto his pillow, adjusts the blanket, steps back. Even in the darkness, it looks real. Human hair from the barber shop. Flesh-tone paint mixed just right. The Anglin brothers do the same. 3 perfect decoys lying in their bunks. To any guard doing a casual check, they're fast asleep. Morris takes a breath, removes his ventilation grate, and disappears into the wall. The utility corridor behind the cells is pitch black. Morris drops down, feels his way along the concrete wall. His hands find the familiar pipes, the rough surfaces he's memorized over months of secret reconnaissance. The Anglin brothers drop down behind him, 3 shadows moving through a space that shouldn't exist. Every footstep calculated, every breath controlled. Above them, the prison sleeps. Guards making their rounds, inmates dreaming behind bars, none of them knowing that 3 men are already gone. Now comes the tricky part. The route they've planned leads up through the prison's guts. Plumbing shafts, utility spaces, areas where no prisoner should ever go. Morris finds the opening they've identified, starts climbing. The metal is cold, slippery. One wrong move, one loose pipe, one noise that carries, and it's over. Behind him, John Anglin follows, then Clarence. 3 men ascending through the bowels of America's most secure prison, moving toward the roof, toward freedom, or toward the most spectacular failure in Alcatraz history. The prison roof stretches out under the June night sky. Morris emerges first, stays low, scans for guards in the towers. The searchlights sweep predictable patterns. He's timed them for months, knows exactly where the blind spots are. The Anglin brothers surface behind him. For the first time in years, they're breathing free air. No bars, no walls, just the San Francisco Bay, spreading out below them like a black mirror. But they're not free yet. The hardest part is still ahead, getting down that 50-foot wall. They've prepared for this. Knotted sheets and electrical cord, tested for weight, hidden for months. Morris secures the makeshift rope to a roof fixture, tests it one more time, 50 feet straight down the exterior wall of Alcatraz. In the darkness, with prison guards patrolling below, if someone spots them halfway down, there's nowhere to go, no way back up, no way to explain. Morris goes first, swings over the edge, hand over hand, foot by foot, disappearing into the night like a ghost. The northeast shore of Alcatraz Island. Morris drops the last few feet, rolls, stays low. The Anglin brothers follow. 3 men crouched in the shadows at the water's edge, hearts pounding. They've made it this far, farther than any Alcatraz escapee in history. But now comes the moment of truth. The San Francisco Bay spreads out ahead of them. Cold, dark, those currents everyone talks about. They're about to find out just how brutal they really are. Morris starts inflating the raft. The raft takes shape in the darkness. Raincoats sewn together, vulcanized with steam from the prison pipes. It looks fragile, homemade, but it's all they have. Morris tests the air chambers. The Anglin brothers strap on their improvised life vests. The bay water laps against the rocky shore, and even in June it's shockingly cold. They can feel it through their prison shoes. 58 degrees. In the darkness, with the current running strong toward the Golden Gate. This is their highway to freedom, or their grave. They push off. The raft bobs like a cork, immediately caught by the current. Morris paddles hard with their homemade wooden paddle, trying to angle toward Angel Island. But the bay has other plans. The water is alive, pulling them in directions they didn't expect. The cold seeps through their clothes instantly. Behind them, Alcatraz shrinks into the night. Ahead, nothing but black water and the distant lights of San Francisco. 3 men on a makeshift raft, betting their lives against the most dangerous waters on the west coast. The current is stronger than they imagined. The raft pitches and rolls, taking on water. Morris and the Anglin brothers paddle desperately, but they're fighting forces beyond their control. The bay doesn't care about their brilliant plan, doesn't care about 18 months of preparation. The water is indifferent to human ambition, and somewhere behind them, in less than 7 hours, guards will discover the dummy heads. The greatest manhunt in FBI history will begin, but right now, it's just 3 men against the Pacific Ocean. What happens next depends on who you ask. The FBI will say they drowned, that the bay claimed them like it claimed so many others who tried to swim these waters, but families will whisper different stories. Sightings, Christmas cards with no return address, phone calls that hang up when voices get too familiar. Tonight, though, none of that matters. Tonight it's just Morris and the Anglin brothers, somewhere out there in the darkness. 3 dots on a vast black ocean, swimming toward a mystery that will haunt America for decades. By dawn, their raft will wash up in pieces. Footprints will be found on Angel Island, personal effects scattered along the shore, but no bodies. Never any bodies. And in the cells of Alcatraz, 3 dummy heads will stare at the ceiling with painted eyes, keeping their secrets. Did Morris and the Anglins make it to shore? Did they disappear into new lives? Or did the bay swallow them whole? That's a story for tomorrow. Tonight, 3 men have vanished into legend. Into the Bay, June 11th, 1962, 11:47 p.m. 3 men crouch on the rocky northeast shore of Alcatraz Island, their hearts hammering against their ribs. Frank Morris unrolls the raincoat raft they've spent months crafting in secret. The Anglin brothers clutch makeshift paddles, hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. Behind them, the prison towers loom like sleeping giants. Ahead, the black waters of San Francisco Bay, churning with currents that have claimed stronger swimmers than them. But there's no turning back now. This is it, freedom or death. Morris begins inflating the raft. The rubber expands with each desperate breath Morris forces into it. John Anglin keeps watch, scanning the guard towers for any sign of movement. 1 flashlight beam, 1 shout from above, and it's all over. Clarence helps steady the raft as it takes shape, their salvation growing larger with each passing second. The sound of waves crashes against the rocks below, almost drowning out their ragged breathing. Morris's lungs burn, but he doesn't stop. Can't stop. This homemade piece of rubber and raincoat is their only ticket out of hell. Almost ready. Almost there. The raft inflates fully, and it actually looks like it might work. Morris ties off the valve with trembling fingers. The Anglin brothers grab the life vests they've crafted from the same stolen raincoats. These aren't Coast Guard approved. Hell, they're barely holding together. But they're all the boys have between them and the freezing bay. John tests the paddle. Feels flimsy but functional. Clarence whispers, "This is insane." Morris grins in the darkness. Insane beats life in a cage. They drag their creation toward the water's edge. The moment of truth arrives. Ice-cold water hits their ankles. The bay temperature, maybe 50 degrees, maybe less. The kind of cold that stops your heart in minutes if you're not prepared. The raft bobs in the shallow water, looking impossibly small against the vast darkness ahead. Morris holds it steady while the Anglin brothers climb aboard. The rubber groans under their weight but holds. So far, so good. Morris pushes them deeper before hauling himself up. Water sloshes around their feet through small leaks. Nothing's perfect, but they're floating. They're actually floating. The current grabs them immediately. The bay pulls them away from Alcatraz like a giant invisible hand. No going back now, even if they wanted to. The current's stronger than they expected, dragging them northwest toward the Marin headlands. John digs his paddle into the black water, trying to steer. The wood scrapes against his palm, no time to worry about splinters. Clarence bails water with his cupped hands. Morris paddles hard on the other side. Their breaths come out in white puffs. The prison lights grow smaller behind them. Each stroke takes them further from their cells, closer to freedom. Waves crash over the sides of their makeshift raft. Salt water stings their eyes, fills their mouths. The bay doesn't care about their plan or their desperation. It just wants to swallow them whole. Morris feels the raft losing air, slow but steady. The seams aren't perfect. Nothing about this escape is perfect. But perfect wasn't an option back in their cells. John's paddle snaps against a wave, half the blade gone. Just like that. He keeps paddling with what's left. "We're not dying out here," Clarence shouts over the wind. "Not after coming this far." The lights of San Francisco shimmer across the water like scattered diamonds, so close you could almost swim there if the current wasn't trying to drag you out to sea. Morris checks their position. They're drifting further north than planned, but still moving away from the island. That's what matters. The raft sags lower in the water now, taking on more with each wave. Their legs are numb from the cold. Hypothermia's creeping in, but they're alive, they're free, and for the first time in years, that word actually means something. Freedom. They taste it in the salt spray. Behind them, Alcatraz looks like a child's toy. Those massive walls that held them for months, tiny now. The guard towers that watched their every move, just specks of light in the darkness. John laughs, actually laughs out loud. It's a sound none of them have made in years. Pure, unfiltered joy, mixed with terror. They did it. They actually did it. Escaped from the rock. The so-called inescapable prison is shrinking in their wake. Morris grins despite his chattering teeth. "Take a good look, boys. Last time we're ever seeing that place." The current carries them further into the bay. The water around them is black as ink. No moon tonight, which helped them escape but makes navigation nearly impossible. Clarence squints toward the mainland, trying to spot a landmark. Anything familiar? The bay's bigger than it looked from their cell windows. Way bigger. Waves slap against the raft with increasing force. Morris feels air escaping faster now. They've got maybe 20 minutes before this thing deflates completely. There, John points through the spray. Lights. That's got to be Marin. They paddle harder, fighting exhaustion and cold. The raft groans but holds together, still floating, still free. Their hands are so numb they can barely grip the paddles. The cold's winning, creeping up their arms, settling into their bones. But they keep moving, keep fighting, because the alternative is going back to those cells, and that's not happening. Not tonight. Not ever. Morris's vision blurs from the spray and exhaustion. How long have they been out here? 20 minutes? An hour? Time doesn't exist in this black void. Just the rhythm of paddling and the constant battle to stay afloat. The raft's sagging dangerously low now. More water than air. But they're still moving. Still alive. A wave bigger than the rest crashes over them, nearly flipping the raft. Clarence goes under for a terrifying second before clawing his way back up. He swallowed half the bay, coughing up salt water and fighting panic. Morris grabs his arm, pulls him steady. "Stay with us," he shouts over the wind. The raft spins in the current, completely out of control now, but they're still together, still fighting. John spots something ahead, darker water, calmer waves. "Shallows," he yells. They might actually make it to shore. The thought hits them all at once. Land, safety, a real chance. The current slows as they approach what looks like Angel Island. Their paddles scrape bottom in the shallows, actual ground beneath them. Morris can't believe it. They've crossed the bay, made it through the freezing water and crushing waves in a raft made from stolen raincoats. The brothers help each other stand on shaking legs. Their clothes are soaked through, skin blue from cold. But they're breathing, they're alive, and most importantly, they're not in prison. Morris looks back one last time at the distant glow of Alcatraz. So long, Rock. They stumble toward the dark shoreline ahead. They drag the deflated raft onto the beach and collapse in the sand. Every muscle screams from the cold and exhaustion, but they made it. Actually made it. Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin, the first men to successfully escape from Alcatraz and live to tell about it. Well, maybe live to tell about it. They're still freezing, still lost on an island in the middle of San Francisco Bay, but they're free. For the first time in years, no guards are watching them, no bars surround them, no concrete walls trap them, just the open sky and endless possibilities. They sit on that beach for a moment, letting it sink in. The impossible has happened. 3 desperate men with nothing but ingenuity and determination have beaten the system, escaped from America's most secure prison using soap, spoons and raincoats. The waves wash their makeshift raft back toward the bay, evidence of their incredible journey disappearing into the darkness. Morris stands first, helps the brothers to their feet. Somewhere in the distance, dogs will be barking soon, sirens will wail, but right now, in this moment, they're free men under the open sky, and nobody can take that away. Morning of the missing, June 12th, 1962, 7 a.m. Officer Bill Long starts his shift like any other Tuesday on Alcatraz. Coffee still hot, fog rolling off San Francisco Bay. The rock quiet except for seagulls and that constant wind. Long's walking the cell house corridor, checking on America's most dangerous criminals. Same routine he's done for 3 years. Keys jangling, footsteps echoing off concrete. He stops at cell 138, looks in. Frank Morris is still asleep, face to the wall. Long moves on. Cell 136. John Anglin, also sleeping. Everything normal, everything routine, everything wrong. Here's what Long doesn't know yet. Those aren't men sleeping in those bunks. They're masterpieces of deception. Dummy heads so realistic they fooled guards all night. Papier-mâché skulls molded from soap and toilet paper. Hair carefully collected from the prison barbershop. Skin tone mixed from paint stolen from maintenance. Even fake eyebrows. The Anglins and Morris spent months perfecting these decoys. And right now, as Long continues his morning rounds, those 3 men are either free or dead. There's no middle ground. Not in these waters. Long reaches the end of B block. Turns around. Something's nagging at him. Morris looked off. Too still, maybe. Wrong position. Long's been doing this long enough to trust his gut. He walks back to cell 138. Looks closer. That's when he sees it. The hair's too perfectly arranged. No one sleeps with their hair that neat. Long calls out, "Morris, count time." Nothing. "Morris." He bangs his nightstick on the bars. The head doesn't move. That's when Bill Long's blood goes cold. That's when everything changes. Long fumbles for his keys. His hands are shaking now. Opens the cell door. Reaches for what he thought was Frank Morris. His fingers touch papier-mâché. Cold, fake. He jerks his hand back like he's been burned. Stares at this thing in the bed. This impossible thing. Because this means Long spins around. Runs to cell 136. John Anglin's bunk. Same thing. A dummy head staring at nothing. Then cell 140. Clarence Anglin. Another fake. 3 cells. 3 elaborate decoys. 3 missing men. The most secure prison in America has been beaten by soap and toilet paper. Long hits the alarm. That bone-deep siren that means everything's gone sideways. Guards come running from every direction. Lieutenant Jerome Kramer arrives first. Takes one look at those dummy heads and goes white. "Jesus Christ," he whispers. Then louder. "Lock it down, lock everything down now." The rock transforms in seconds. Every door slamming shut. Every corridor sealed. Guards spreading out like they're hunting ghosts. Because in a way they are. How do you catch men who might already be free? How do you hunt people who might already be drowned? Officer Fred Freeman is checking cell 142. That's Alan West's cell. The 4th man in this conspiracy. West is sitting on his bunk, looking sick. Freeman knows immediately. "You were part of this." West just nods. Can't even speak. His vent is loose but still in place. His hole not quite wide enough. While his partners escaped into legend, West got stuck. Literally, his dreams of freedom trapped by a few extra inches of concrete. Freeman looks at West with something almost like pity, because being left behind might be worse than drowning. Warden Olin Blackwell gets the call at 7:17 a.m. He's eating breakfast at his house on the island when his phone rings. "Sir, we have a situation." Blackwell's been running Alcatraz for 2 years. He knows that tone. Someone's dead or someone's gone. What kind of situation? 3 inmates are missing, sir. Morris and both Anglins. The fork drops from Blackwell's hand, hits his plate with a tiny clink. That sound will haunt him for the rest of his life. Because in that moment, the impossible becomes reality. His prison has failed. Blackwell races to the cell house, sees those dummy heads. His career flashes before his eyes. 29 escape attempts in Alcatraz's history. All failures, all recaptures or confirmed deaths. He built his reputation on that record. Perfect security. Inescapable island. Now 3 bank robbers have made him look like a fool, using soap and toilet paper and months of patience he never imagined they possessed. The warden who promised no one would ever escape the rock is staring at empty cells and papier-mâché heads, his legacy in ruins. By 8 a.m., the phone calls start. FBI field office in San Francisco. Coast Guard station. San Francisco Police Department. Every law enforcement agency within 100 miles. The message is always the same. We have 3 escaped federal prisoners. Consider them armed and extremely dangerous. Special Agent John Tuttle takes the FBI call. He's been hunting bank robbers for 15 years. But escapees from Alcatraz, that's unprecedented. That's impossible. That's about to become the biggest manhunt in California history and the most embarrassing failure in federal prison history. Coast Guard cutters are hitting the bay by 8:30. Helicopters circling the island. Search teams spreading across Angel Island and Marin County shores. They're looking for 3 things: bodies, evidence, or the most unlikely scenario of all, living escapees. Captain Paul Madigan leads the water search. 30 years on San Francisco Bay. He knows these currents, these temperatures. In his professional opinion, those 3 men drowned hours ago, but they're searching anyway, because hope dies hard, and bodies tell stories that mysteries never can. Back in the cell house, investigators are discovering the full scope of this operation. Loosened vents, homemade tools, a workshop hidden behind cell 138, stolen raincoats turned into life preservers, months of planning reduced to evidence bags and crime scene photos. Officer Robert Checky has worked Alcatraz for 8 years. He's walking through that utility corridor, seeing holes cut through concrete walls. This is impossible, he keeps saying. This is absolutely impossible. But impossible things leave evidence. And the evidence is everywhere. Alan West starts talking around 10 a.m. No choice, really. He's facing solitary confinement or worse. So he spills everything. The plan, the timeline, the route they took, how they built their raft, where they launched it, when they left. West's confession reads like fiction, like something from a crime novel. But those dummy heads are real. Those cut bars are real. That hole in the wall is real. FBI agent Tuttle takes notes and shakes his head. In 30 years of law enforcement, he's never seen anything like this level of planning and execution. By noon, the media arrives. Reporters and camera crews on every boat they can charter. The story spreading across radio and television. 3 men escape Alcatraz. Headlines that will sell newspapers for weeks. The federal government's most secure prison has been beaten by bank robbers with makeshift tools. Prison officials refuse most interviews. What can they say? How do you explain the inexplicable? How do you admit that America's escape-proof prison isn't? The photos of those dummy heads will become iconic. Symbols of ingenuity, triumphing over authority, or dying in the attempt. 5 p.m., June 12, 1962. 10 hours after discovery. FBI officially confirms what everyone already knows. Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin have escaped from Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. The impossible has happened. 3 men with nothing but time, patience, and desperate determination have vanished from the most secure prison in America. They're either free somewhere, planning their next move, or their bodies are feeding crabs on the bottom of San Francisco Bay. Either way, they beat the rock. And that changes everything. Fragments, footprints, and false hopes. Dawn breaks over San Francisco Bay. June 12, 1962. The alarm bells are still echoing across Alcatraz. 3 men vanished into the darkness. And now what? Now comes the part nobody talks about much. The messy aftermath. The confusion. The FBI scrambling to piece together what actually happened. Because here's the thing about perfect escapes. They leave imperfect evidence behind. And that evidence, it's about to tell a very confusing story. Within hours, every federal agency you can think of is mobilizing. FBI, Coast Guard, local police, prison officials, the works. This isn't just an escape. This is a national embarrassment. Alcatraz, the supposedly inescapable fortress, has been breached. And not by some elaborate outside operation. By 3 guys with spoons and a lot of patience. The manhunt that follows becomes one of the largest in California history, but they're not looking for escapees anymore. They're looking for bodies. Coast Guard boats circle the island like sharks. Helicopters sweep the bay. Divers plunge into the freezing water. They're working against time and tide, literally. San Francisco Bay doesn't give up secrets easily. The currents are vicious. The water's cold enough to kill you in 20 minutes. Everyone knows the math. If Morris and the Anglins hit that water, they're probably dead. The question isn't if they'll find bodies, it's when. Except the when never comes. Day 1 of the search. Nothing. Day 2. Still nothing. By day 3, people are starting to whisper, "Where are the bodies?" The bay's not that big. The currents are predictable. If 3 men drowned trying to cross, where did they end up? This is where the story gets weird, because instead of finding dead escapees, they start finding something else entirely. Evidence, not of death, but of possible survival, and that changes everything about how this story ends. Angel Island. About a mile north of Alcatraz. June 17th, 5 days after the escape. A search team is combing the shoreline when someone spots it. A paddle. Wooden, makeshift, clearly homemade. The kind of thing desperate men might fashion in a prison workshop. But here's what gets interesting. It's not floating in the water like debris from a sinking raft. It's lying on the beach, above the tide line, like someone dragged it ashore and left it there. The paddle isn't alone. Searchers find pieces of what looks like a raft. Rubber fragments, bits of raincoat material, the same makeshift construction they found in that utility corridor back on Alcatraz. But again, these aren't floating like wreckage. They're scattered along the shore like someone made it to land, then abandoned their equipment, like you would if you'd successfully crossed one of the most dangerous stretches of water in America and didn't need your emergency gear anymore. Then comes the discovery that really messes with everyone's assumptions. Footprints, fresh ones, leading away from where the raft pieces were found. 3 sets, different shoe sizes, heading inland toward the island's interior. Not the kind of tracks you'd expect from drowning victims. These are the footprints of people who walked away, people who made it. The FBI photographs everything, measures the prints, but publicly, they start downplaying the significance. Wonder why? Here's where the official story starts getting really strange. Despite the paddle on shore, the raft remnants above the tide line, the footprints leading inland, the FBI's position never wavers. The escapees drowned. Case closed. They died in the bay. End of story. But wait, if they drowned, where are the bodies? If they died in the water, how did their equipment end up neatly arranged on a beach a mile away? The physical evidence tells one story. The official conclusion tells another. The FBI's logic goes something like this. Sure, the paddle and raft pieces made it to Angel Island. Sure, there are footprints. But that doesn't prove the men survived. Maybe the equipment washed ashore separately. Maybe the footprints belong to searchers or park rangers. Maybe. But here's what they can't maybe away. 3 bodies that should have turned up somewhere, somehow, eventually. Bodies that have never been found. In 60 years of searching, while the FBI is busy explaining away evidence, other people are starting to ask different questions. Family members, specifically the Anglin family, Marie Anglin, the brother's sister, Robert Anglin, their brother. They're not buying the drowning story, not even a little bit, because they know something the FBI doesn't. Their family has a history of sticking together, and they're starting to get signs, subtle ones, that John and Clarence might still be out there somewhere. The Anglins had escaped before, not from Alcatraz, but from other places. They were good at it, really good. John had broken out of prison multiple times, Clarence too. These weren't desperate, panicked criminals making a doomed run for freedom. These were professional escape artists who'd spent months planning every detail, the kind of men who might actually have a post-escape plan, the kind who might know how to disappear and stay disappeared. So now you've got 2 competing narratives taking shape. The official one, 3 desperate men died trying to cross San Francisco Bay. Case closed, file it away, move on. And the family narrative, 3 skilled escapees made it to shore, disappeared into the night, and are somewhere out there living new lives under new names. The evidence? It could support either story. That's the maddening thing about this case. Every clue cuts both ways. The manhunt continues for weeks, then months. FBI agents follow up every lead, chase every sighting. Someone thinks they saw Frank Morris in Alabama. The Anglin brothers supposedly spotted in South America. None of it pans out, but none of it gets definitively ruled out either. It's like chasing ghosts. Maybe because that's exactly what they're doing, or maybe because the escapees are just that good at staying hidden. The trail goes cold, but it never quite goes dead. By winter of 1962, the official search is winding down. The FBI maintains its position. The men drowned. Alcatraz maintains its reputation, mostly. But something has shifted. The absolute certainty that escape was impossible, gone. The unshakable faith in the system, cracked. 3 men with makeshift tools and desperate courage had done what everyone said couldn't be done. Whether they lived or died, they'd already won. The mystery was just beginning. The other side of the coin. Here's what nobody talks about when they tell this story. 3 men vanished into the night, but they left families behind. Mothers who kept setting extra plates at dinner for decades. Brothers who jumped every time the phone rang. Wives who never remarried because, what if? The FBI closed the case, called them dead, drowned in the bay, but try telling that to Marie Anglin. She got a Christmas card 30 years later. No return address. Just 2 words written inside, love always. Marie Anglin never stopped believing. John and Clarence's mother. She'd sit on her porch in Florida, scanning faces in crowds, hoping, every knock at the door, maybe this time. She kept their rooms exactly the same. Beds made, clothes folded, waiting. Her neighbors thought she'd lost her mind. The FBI agents who came by, they were kind but firm. Your boys are dead, Mrs. Anglin. Accept it. Move on. But mothers don't move on. Not from something like this. Not when there's no body. No proof. The sightings started almost immediately. June 1962. 3 days after the escape. A fisherman swore he saw 3 men on a makeshift raft near Angel Island. By the time the Coast Guard arrived, nothing. Then a family in Stockton called police. 3 men matching the descriptions asked for directions at a gas station, paid cash, disappeared before officers arrived. Every few months, another call, another maybe. The FBI investigated each one. Every single lead went nowhere, but they kept coming anyway. Robert Anglin knew something was different about his family reunion in 1975. His brothers John and Clarence had been officially dead for 13 years, but there they were, 2 extra men at the family barbecue, faces partially hidden by hats, staying in the shadows. When Robert tried to approach them, his sister grabbed his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "Just don't." The men left before sunset. Robert never got a good look at their faces, but he swears one of them had Clarence's laugh. Marie kept a shoebox under her bed. Inside, evidence the FBI never saw. Christmas cards with no return addresses, postmarked from different cities across the country. The handwriting looked familiar, but different somehow. Older, more careful, and the photos, grainy Polaroids that arrived in unmarked envelopes. 2 men who looked like John and Clarence might look 20 years later, older, bearded, but those eyes, Marie would trace their faces with her finger. "My boys," she'd whisper. "They made it. I know they did." The 1992 photograph changed everything. Sent anonymously to Robert Anglin. 2 men standing by a car, faces partially visible. The FBI's photo analysis unit examined it for weeks. Bone structure measurements, facial recognition algorithms. The results were inconclusive. Could be them, could be anyone, but the family saw what they wanted to see. John's crooked smile, Clarence's distinctive jawline. After 30 years of hoping, they had something tangible, something real. Even if the experts couldn't confirm it, they knew. Family knows. Frank Morris had no family visits during his time at Alcatraz. No letters. No one waiting for him on the outside. That's what made him dangerous. Nothing to lose. But after the escape, something strange happened. People started claiming they were his relatives. A woman in Louisiana said he was her cousin, showed up at FBI offices with baby pictures. Stories about family reunions. None of it checked out. Why lie about being related to an escaped convict? Maybe loneliness. Maybe the desire to be connected to something legendary. Something bigger than yourself. The phone calls were the worst part. Marie's phone would ring at 2 a.m., static on the line, then a voice, distant, careful, "Mama," just that one word before the line went dead. It happened 6 times between 1965 and 1978. Always the same time, always the same voice. The FBI tried to trace them. Technology wasn't good enough back then. Could have been a cruel prank. Could have been wishful thinking on Marie's part. But she'd sit by that phone for hours afterward, hoping it would ring again. Alan West never forgave himself for not making it out. His cell vent was stuck that final night. By the time he worked it loose, the others were gone. He spent the rest of his life in various prisons, dying behind bars in 1978. But before he died, West told his cellmate something interesting. He claimed he'd received a letter in 1975, no return address, just 3 words, "We made it." Was it real? Was West making it up to feel better about being left behind? We'll never know. The letter was never found. The rumors followed a pattern. Always in small towns, always paid in cash. 3 men who didn't quite fit in but weren't quite strangers either. They'd work construction for a few months, keep to themselves, then disappear. A farmer in Oregon swore he employed 2 brothers in 1967, never got their real names, but they knew things about Florida, about prison. When he saw their faces on a wanted poster years later, his blood ran cold. Same men, he was sure of it, but they were long gone by then. The hardest part wasn't the not knowing, it was the hoping. Marie Anglin aged a decade in every year after the escape. Every holiday she'd wonder, are they somewhere else celebrating Christmas? Do they remember her birthday? Do they know their father died in 1978? Hope is beautiful, but it's also exhausting. It keeps you suspended between grief and joy, never letting you fully experience either. The families of Frank Morris and the Anglins lived in that liminal space for decades, prisoners of their own hope. Alfred Anglin carried the secret for 40 years, John and Clarence's older brother. On his deathbed in 2002, surrounded by family, he finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "They made it. I know because I helped them." The room went silent. Alfred claimed he'd arranged safe passage to South America, provided fake IDs, money, a boat waiting in Marin County. He'd kept quiet to protect them, to protect the family. Was it true, or the fevered confession of a dying man desperate to give his family closure? Alfred's confession split the family. Some believed him, finally proof their boys had survived. Others thought it was cruel, giving false hope when they'd started to accept the truth. Marie, 93 and frail, listened to the story with tears in her eyes. "I always knew," she whispered, but doubt crept in later. Alfred had been sick for months. Medications can cause hallucinations. Deathbed confessions aren't always reliable. Still, what if he was telling the truth? What if they really had made it after all these years? Marie Anglin died in 2010 at age 97. She never stopped believing her sons survived that night in San Francisco Bay. Her funeral was small, quiet, just family and a few old friends. But something strange happened as they lowered her casket. 2 men in dark suits watched from a distance. Older, weathered. When the service ended, they placed white roses on a nearby headstone and walked away. The cemetery groundskeeper found the roses later. No note, no explanation, just flowers, and a mystery that refuses to die. A tale of 2 narratives. Here's where this story splits in half. On one side you've got the FBI. Official reports, government stamps. Case closed, they say. Those 3 men drowned in San Francisco Bay. End of story. But then there's the other side. Family members with photographs, deathbed confessions, computer models showing the currents that night. 2 completely different endings to the same escape. And honestly, both sides make compelling cases. So which version do you believe? Let's start with the official narrative. The FBI position from day one. Simple and clean. Morris, John, and Clarence made it to the water. Sure, they launched their makeshift raft into the bay around midnight. But that's where their luck ran out. The water temperature that June night, 54 degrees, hypothermia sets in fast. The currents were pulling toward the Golden Gate, straight out to the Pacific. 3 desperate men versus the unforgiving bay. The evidence seemed to back this up. Within days, search teams found pieces of their raft washed up on Angel Island. a paddle floating near Alcatraz, personal belongings scattered along the shoreline. But here's what they didn't find. Bodies. Not one. Not ever. The FBI explained this away easily enough. Strong currents, they said. Bodies get swept out to sea. Happens all the time. Case closed. The escape was a failure. Alcatraz remained unbeaten. This became the official story. 3 inmates tried to escape the inescapable prison. They died in the attempt. The system worked. Alcatraz's reputation stayed intact. For decades, this was the only version you'd hear from law enforcement. FBI files, prison records, news reports, all saying the same thing. The Bay claimed 3 more victims. The prison's perfect record remained unblemished. But families don't always accept official endings, especially when the evidence starts getting weird. Because parallel to this official story, another narrative was quietly building. Started with the families. Robert Anglin, brother to John and Clarence, insisted his brothers didn't die that night. He claimed they'd been in contact. Christmas cards arriving with no return address. Phone calls in the middle of the night where no one spoke but he could hear breathing. Then came the photographs. Blurry images from what looked like family gatherings. Men who looked remarkably like the escaped brothers. The most compelling piece came from their sister, Marie. She'd visit the family farm in Florida every Christmas. Year after year, she'd find fresh roses on their mother's grave. No one knew who was leaving them, but Marie was convinced. Her brothers were alive. They were coming home, at least for Christmas. The roses always appeared around December 23rd. Always red, always fresh. For over 20 years, those flowers showed up like clockwork until Marie stopped checking. Then, in 1975, Robert Anglin made a confession on his deathbed, called his nephew over, told him the truth he'd been keeping for 13 years. John and Clarence didn't drown. They made it to shore. They'd been hiding in South America, had been sending money to the family through intermediaries. Robert died the next day, taking most of his secrets with him, but his nephew remembered every word. The story started spreading through the family, then beyond. Fast forward to 2013. San Francisco police receive a handwritten letter, no return address. The writer claims to be John Anglin, says all 3 escapees survived that night. Frank Morris died in 2008. Clarence passed in 2011. But John, still alive, he says, old and sick, but breathing, wants to make a deal. Medical treatment in exchange for coming clean. The handwriting analysis was inconclusive. Could be real, could be someone's twisted joke. Another mystery layered on top of mysteries. Modern technology started weighing in. Computer models analyzing the tides and currents from June 11, 1962. The results were surprising. If they'd launched between 11:30 and midnight, the currents actually worked in their favor. Instead of pulling them toward the Golden Gate, the water would have pushed them toward Marin County. Angel Island could have been a stepping stone, not a dead end. The bay that night might have been their highway to freedom, not their grave. The Mythbusters got involved. Built replica rafts using the same materials, prison raincoats, stolen life vests, wooden paddles, launched them into the bay at night with the same tidal conditions. Some sank, others drifted toward shore. The escape wasn't just possible, it was probable. If 3 determined men could survive the water temperature for 2 hours, they could have made it to land. The FBI's impossible escape suddenly looked very achievable. But here's the thing about competing narratives. Each side has holes you could drive a truck through. The family evidence is compelling but not conclusive. Blurry photos prove nothing. Deathbed confessions get twisted in retelling. Christmas roses could come from anyone. And that 2013 letter could be from a wannabe seeking attention. The official story has gaps too. No bodies ever found. Personal items that could have been planted. Evidence that raises more questions than it answers. The FBI sticks to their guns. 3 men died in the bay. Case closed. But privately, former agents have expressed doubts. The lack of bodies bothered them. The family stories were persistent and detailed. Too detailed to be complete fabrications. Some retired investigators now think the escapees might have made it. Others remain convinced they drowned. Even the people who worked the case can't agree on what actually happened that night. What we're left with is 2 equally compelling stories. One where 3 desperate men died trying to taste freedom. Another where they succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams, lived quiet lives under new names, watched the world change from hiding, maybe visited family graves at Christmas. Both narratives have evidence, both have believers, and both will probably outlive all of us, because some mysteries are more powerful than any truth. So which story do you believe? The official version where justice prevailed and the Bay claimed 3 more souls? Or the whispered family version where 3 brothers outsmarted the greatest prison in America and disappeared into legend? Maybe the real answer is that we'll never know, and maybe that's exactly how it should be. Some stories are better left unfinished. Some questions are more interesting than their answers. The mystery of Alcatraz lives on. End of an era. June 12, 1962. The morning after. Guards are finding those dummy heads. The FBI is scrambling, and something just broke at Alcatraz. Not just the escape itself, but what it represented. For 28 years, this place had one job: keep the worst criminals in America locked up, period. And 3 guys with spoons and stolen raincoats just made that promise look like a joke. The ripple effects? They're about to change everything. The escape hits the papers within hours. Front page, coast to coast. 3 convicts flee Alcatraz. The FBI is calling it a manhunt. But everyone knows what this really is: a massive embarrassment. 29 previous escape attempts, all failures. That was the selling point. That was the brand. And now there are 3 empty cells and a whole lot of explaining to do. The Federal Bureau of Prisons is not happy. Behind closed doors, the conversations get ugly fast. Budget meetings turn into blame sessions. How did 3 inmates outsmart an entire federal prison? The cost of running Alcatraz was already astronomical. $14 million a year in today's money. For what? To house fewer than 300 prisoners on a rock in the middle of San Francisco Bay. And now this. The politicians start asking uncomfortable questions. March 21st, 1963, less than a year after the escape, Attorney General Robert Kennedy makes it official. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary will close. The official reason? Cost. Too expensive to maintain, too isolated, too outdated. But everyone knows the real reason. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers had made America's most secure prison look foolish. And that kind of embarrassment? It's not something you recover from easily. The last inmates leave Alcatraz on March 21st, 1963. 27 prisoners transferred to other federal facilities. The guards pack up their things. The kitchen goes quiet. The cells empty out one by one. And then, silence. For the first time in 29 years, Alcatraz has no prisoners. No guards walking the corridors. No sounds except wind and waves. The rock becomes exactly that again. A rock. Walking through Alcatraz after the closure was like stepping into a ghost story. Cell doors hanging open. Personal belongings left behind. The dining hall tables still set for meals that would never be served. And in cell block B, those 3 cells, 11, 12 and 13, the holes in the walls hastily patched up, but you could still see where they'd been, still feel what happened there. The years pass. Alcatraz becomes a tourist attraction in 1973. Visitors walk through those same corridors, peer into those same cells, but the questions never stop. Did they make it? Are they still out there? The FBI officially closes the case in 1979, 17 years after the escape. Their conclusion: Morris and the Anglins drowned in San Francisco Bay, case closed. Except, not really. December 2013. San Francisco Police Department. A letter arrives in the mail. No return address. The handwriting is shaky, like someone old or sick wrote it. The envelope is postmarked from somewhere in the South. Inside, 3 pages of lined paper, and a claim that changes everything, or at least reopens everything. The letter writer says his name is John Anglin, one of the escapees. My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with my brother Clarence and Frank Morris. I'm 83 years old and in bad shape. I have cancer. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely. The letter continues, describing their escape, how they nearly drowned, how they split up afterward, how Frank Morris died in 2008, how Clarence died in 2011, how John is the last one left. The letter writer offers proof. He says he's willing to turn himself in, but only if he gets medical treatment and a promise of only one more year in prison. I will write back in several months. If you announce on TV that I will be promised to first go to jail for no more than a year and get medical attention, I will write back to let you know exactly where I am. The FBI analyzes the letter. Handwriting experts examine it. But here's the thing about handwriting analysis. It's not foolproof, especially with someone claiming to be 83 years old and sick. The letter could be real, could be fake, could be from John Anglin, could be from someone who studied the case obsessively. The FBI's conclusion? Inconclusive, which means the mystery lives on. Today, computer models show the escape was possible. The right tides, the right timing, the right currents, they could have made it to Angel Island. From there to Marin County, into the California wilderness. 3 bank robbers with nothing left to lose and everything to gain, smart enough to plan the impossible, lucky enough to pull it off, or unlucky enough to drown trying. 62 years later, and we're still talking about it, still wondering. The case officially remains open. The US Marshals still follow up on tips, still hope for a breakthrough. 3 men vanished from the most secure prison in America, and we still don't know if they lived or died. That's not just an escape story, that's mythology. That's the American dream twisted into something dark and beautiful. Frank Morris, John Anglin, Clarence Anglin, 3 names that closed a prison and opened a mystery that refuses to die. Maybe they drowned in San Francisco Bay that June night in 1962. Maybe they made it to shore and lived free lives under different names. Maybe one of them wrote that letter in 2013. We'll probably never know for sure, and maybe that's exactly how they wanted it. Unsolved, unforgotten. 60 years later, we're still talking about 3 men who vanished into the San Francisco Bay on a June night in 1962. That tells you something right there. Most prison escapes get forgotten, filed away, closed cases gathering dust. But not this one. This one lives on, gets passed down, spawns documentaries, books, movies. Why? What is it about Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers that won't let us look away? Maybe it's because their story asks a question we can't answer. Humans are wired for mysteries. Give us a puzzle with all the pieces, and we solve it, file it away, move on. But give us a puzzle with missing pieces, with gaps we can't fill. We obsess, we theorize, we stay up late arguing about what really happened. The Alcatraz escape is the perfect unsolved mystery. Just enough evidence to keep hope alive, just enough questions to fuel endless debate. Did they make it? Are they still out there somewhere? We may never know, but it's not just the mystery that hooks us. It's what they pulled off. Think about it. 3 men, locked in the most secure prison in America, outsmarted the entire system. They took spoons and turned them into chisels, stole raincoats and built a raft, carved dummy heads so realistic the guards never noticed. For months they worked in secret, patient, methodical, brilliant, and then they walked out the front door, climbed out the back wall. But you get the point. The plan itself reads like fiction. Too clever, too elaborate, too perfectly executed to be real. But it was real. Every detail we've talked about actually happened. A homemade drill from a vacuum motor, human hair stolen from the barbershop floor, steam pipes used to vulcanize rubber raincoats into life vests. It's the kind of ingenuity that makes you shake your head in admiration. These weren't just desperate men. They were criminal masterminds pulling off the heist of the century. And then comes the question that haunts everything. Did they survive? The FBI says no. The bay was too cold, the currents too strong, the odds too impossible. They drowned within hours of hitting the water. Case closed. But that Christmas card to the Anglin family, the deathbed confession from a friend, the 2013 letter claiming to be John Anglin, the family photos that might show aged versions of the brothers. What if the impossible actually happened? What if they made it? The theories multiply every year. They had help on the outside. They stole a boat. They made it to South America. They're living under assumed names in some small town. Or maybe they died on Angel Island. Bodies washed away before anyone could find them. Maybe they're buried somewhere we'll never look. Every piece of evidence gets dissected, analyzed, argued over. Professional investigators and amateur sleuths alike can't let it go. Because every theory is possible. None can be proven wrong. The FBI maintains its official position. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers drowned in San Francisco Bay. The case remains open only because no bodies were ever recovered. But public opinion? That's a different story. Polls show most people believe at least one of the escapees survived. Maybe all three. There's something about the official narrative that doesn't sit right. Too neat, too convenient. The authorities need them to be dead. We need them to be alive. The Anglin family never gave up hope. For decades, they've claimed the brothers are alive. They've shared photos, stories, evidence that would make your head spin. Marie Anglin, the sister, spent her whole life believing. Until her dying day, she insisted her brothers survived. And who are we to say she was wrong? Who are we to crush that hope? Maybe faith is stronger than facts sometimes. Maybe believing is more important than knowing. Modern technology keeps breathing new life into the mystery. Computer models of the Bay currents that night suggest escape was possible with the right timing. Digital aging software creates images of what the escapees might look like today. Cold case investigators use new techniques on old evidence. Each advance in forensics or computing offers another chance to crack the code, but somehow the mystery stays just out of reach, always one step ahead of our best efforts. The escape has become mythology, bigger than the facts, bigger than the men who planned it. It represents something primal in the American psyche. The little guy beating the system, the underdog pulling off the impossible, David slaying Goliath with a homemade slingshot, and stolen raincoats. We've turned Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers into folk heroes, legends, and legends by definition are larger than life, too big for simple answers like they drowned in the bay. What does it say about us that we're still fascinated by this story? Maybe it reveals something fundamental about human nature. We admire cleverness, we root for the underdog, we're drawn to mysteries we can't solve. But more than that, we're inspired by the refusal to accept defeat. These men looked at the impossible and said, "Watch me." They chose freedom over safety, risk over certainty, hope over despair, and that choice resonates across decades. The Alcatraz escape represents the eternal human drive for freedom. Not just physical freedom, but the freedom to choose your own fate, to refuse the role society assigns you, to say no to the cage, no matter how secure the bars. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers weren't just escaping a prison, they were escaping the story everyone else had written for them. The story that said they'd die behind bars. They chose to write their own ending. We need stories like this. In a world that often feels predetermined, where algorithms predict our choices and systems control our options, we need to believe that escape is possible, that three men with nothing but determination and stolen spoons can outsmart the most secure prison in America, that the impossible is just another word for hasn't been done yet, that somewhere, in some small town, Frank Morris might still be reading about his own legend. So here's to the unsolved and unforgotten, to mysteries that refuse easy answers, to the undying human spirit that looks at any cage and starts planning an escape. Whether Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers died in the bay that night, or lived to see another sunrise, they achieved something remarkable. They proved that no prison is truly escape-proof. That hope can't be contained, that freedom once imagined becomes possible, and that some stories are too powerful to ever really end. Farewell to the rock, here we are, end of the story. Except, it's not really an ending, is it? June 11th, 1962. Three men vanish into San Francisco Bay. 62 years later, we're still talking about them, still wondering, still piecing together clues like detectives who can't let go of the case. Frank Morris, John Anglin, Clarence Anglin, names that refuse to fade away, and maybe that's the real escape. Not just from Alcatraz, but from being forgotten. Think about what we've covered here. Months of planning, spoons turned into tools, vacuum motors into drills, raincoats into life rafts, soap and hair into decoy heads so realistic they fooled trained guards. This wasn't just an escape, this was art. Criminal art, sure, but art nonetheless. Every detail calculated, every risk weighed, every backup plan thought through. The kind of meticulous craftsmanship that borders on obsession. Maybe that's why we're still captivated by it. The official story? They drowned. FBI closed the case. Water too cold, currents too strong, no way they survived. But then there's everything else. The Christmas cards to family, The deathbed confession, that letter in 2013 claiming to be John Anglin, the computer models showing escape was possible with the right timing, the lack of bodies after decades of searching. Evidence keeps surfacing, whispers keep spreading, the mystery keeps growing deeper, instead of getting solved. You know what's wild? This story has spawned more theories than almost any unsolved case in American history. Documentaries, movies, books, podcasts like this one, TV specials, internet forums where amateur detectives dissect every detail, people tracking down distant relatives, analyzing tidal charts from 1962, enhancing grainy photos. It's become this massive collective obsession. 3 bank robbers turned into folk heroes. Alcatraz transformed from shame into tourist attraction. The power of an unsolved mystery. Hollywood loves this stuff. Clint Eastwood made a movie about it. Sean Connery played a fictional Alcatraz prisoner. TV shows reference it constantly. Why? Because it hits something deep in the American psyche. The little guy outsmarting the system. Underdogs beating impossible odds. Prisoners who refuse to accept their fate. In a country built on rebellion against authority, these 3 become symbols, not just criminals, but rebels, freedom fighters in their own twisted way. That's the mythology we've created. But let's be honest about what they were. Bank robbers. Career criminals. Men who terrorized innocent people for money. Frank Morris had been in and out of prison since he was 13. The Anglin brothers grew up stealing. None of them were heroes in the traditional sense. They were survivors. Adapt or die. Prison taught them that. And when faced with life behind bars, they chose to risk everything for a chance at freedom. That's what makes this story so complicated, so human. Alcatraz closed in 1963, officially because of cost. Unofficially, this escape was a massive embarrassment. The prison that claimed to be escape-proof had been outsmarted by 3 guys with spoons and determination. The federal government couldn't let that stand, so they shut it down, moved the remaining prisoners to other facilities. The rock went silent, but the story kept echoing across the water, getting louder with each passing year, instead of fading away. The families never stopped believing. Anglin relatives swear the brothers survived, show photos they claim prove it, point to Christmas cards signed with the right names, share stories about phone calls and secret meetings. Robert Anglin's deathbed confession in 2010, claiming his nephews visited him years after the escape. The FBI investigated, couldn't verify, but couldn't disprove either. Faith versus facts, hope versus evidence, the eternal battle between what we want to believe and what we can prove. That 2013 letter still haunts me. Someone claiming to be John Anglin, saying all 3 survived, offering to surrender in exchange for medical care, then disappearing again when authorities tried to verify. Real or fake? We'll probably never know. The handwriting was inconclusive. The details could have been researched, but the timing felt desperate, like someone running out of time, wanting to set the record straight before it's too late. Another piece of the puzzle that doesn't quite fit. Modern technology keeps reviving the case. Computer simulations of bay currents, analysis of tide patterns from 1962, digital enhancement of old photographs, DNA testing of cigarette butts and hair samples. Each advancement in forensic science brings new hope for answers, new ways to examine old evidence. But somehow, the more we learn, the more mysterious it becomes. Technology reveals possibilities we never considered, opens doors to scenarios we hadn't imagined. The case expands instead of narrowing. Maybe that's the real genius of what they did. Not just escaping from prison, but escaping into legend, into that rare space where fact meets fiction, and nobody can tell the difference anymore, where truth becomes less important than the story we tell about truth. They wanted freedom, got immortality instead. Their names spoken more often in death than they ever were in life. If they're watching from wherever they ended up, they must be amazed. The rock sits there in the bay, tourist destination now. Thousands visit every year, stand in those tiny cells, walk the same corridors, touch the same walls, try to imagine what it was like, the desperation, the planning, the fear on that final night. Guides tell the story over and over, each time a little different. Details shift with each telling. Legend grows. The prison that was supposed to break men became the place that made them famous instead. So where does that leave us? With questions that may never have answers, bodies that were never found, a mystery that refuses to die. Three men who vanished into the night and took their secrets with them. Dead or alive, they achieved something most people never do. They became unforgettable. They beat the system, not just by escaping, but by making us care about their escape. 60 years later. That's the ultimate victory. June 11th, 1962. Three desperate men crawled through holes they'd carved with stolen spoons, climbed up plumbing pipes, rappelled down walls, launched a homemade raft into freezing water, and disappeared forever. We'll never stop wondering what happened next. That's their final escape. From certainty, from closure, from being just another solved case. Frank Morris, John Anglin, Clarence Anglin, the men who turned Alcatraz into a question mark that will never become a period.